The sky was not supposed to look like this. It was supposed to be blue, calm, endless. But now, it was covered in massive alien warships, dark and menacing, stretching across the horizon like storm clouds before the worst kind of disaster. The people of Earth had always imagined first contact with an extraterrestrial race to be something extraordinary, something that would change the course of history forever. But no one had expected it to come in the form of an invasion. The Zarinth Empire, an ancient and ruthless force from the stars, did not come in peace. They did not offer greetings, nor did they care for negotiations. They had done this countless times before, descended upon a planet, crushed its defenses, and enslaved its people. To them, Earth was just another world to conquer, another resource to exploit, another civilization to break. They had faced many species before, and all had fallen. Why would humans be any different? The attack was swift and merciless. The world's greatest cities became battlegrounds within hours. Their ships, sleek and impossibly fast, hovered above every major nation, releasing their soldiers like a flood of nightmares. The Zarinth warriors were tall, armored creatures with reptilian features, their glowing red eyes scanning the streets like hunters searching for prey. Their weapons cut through steel and flesh alike, disintegrating anything in their path. Humanity's armies, despite their courage, were nothing in comparison. Bullets bounced off the Zarinth armor like raindrops on stone. Missiles were swatted away by energy shields, and the greatest war machines of mankind crumbled under the power of alien technology. It wasn't a war, it was a massacre. Governments fell within days. Cities burned as millions perished, and those who survived were rounded up like cattle, forced into submission under the cold, unfeeling rule of the conquerors. In the ruins of what was once New York, Daniel Grayson watched it all unfold, his fists clenched so tightly that his nails dug into his skin. He had once been a soldier, a man who had believed in protecting his people, but now he could do nothing but hide in the shadows as his world was torn apart. He had seen his squad wiped out in minutes, their bravery meaning nothing in the face of such overwhelming power. He had seen civilians dragged from their homes, thrown into transport ships like livestock, their cries for help echoing through the empty streets. The Zarinth laughed at their desperation. To them, humanity was weak, fragile, insignificant. They took what they wanted, destroyed what they pleased, and acted as if no force in the universe could ever challenge them. And perhaps, at that moment, they were right. But what the Zarinth did not understand, what they could not possibly comprehend, was that humans were not like the other species they had conquered before. Humans did not break so easily. They did not simply surrender and accept their fate. They adapted. They endured. And when they were pushed too far, when everything was taken from them, they became something else. Something the Zarinth had never faced before. The aliens had seen Earth's armies fall, but they had not yet seen what happened when a human had nothing left to lose. Daniel remained hidden in the ruins, watching the enemy move through the streets with arrogance, their guards lowered, their confidence unshaken. They truly believed that the fight was over. They thought that humanity had been defeated. But deep within the burning remains of Earth, something was beginning to change. The survivors who remained were not waiting for rescue. They were not waiting for hope to arrive from the skies. They were watching, waiting, learning. And in the darkest corners of the conquered world, where the Zarinth could not see, a storm was brewing. One that would shake the Empire to its core. The cold metal floor of the prison camp was covered in dirt and dried blood, the stench of sweat and despair filling the air. Rows of exhausted humans sat in silence, their bodies weakened from days of forced labor and little food. The once proud soldiers, engineers, and ordinary civilians of Earth had been reduced to nothing more than slaves, working under the watchful eyes of their Zarinth captors. Towering above them, the reptilian warriors moved with confidence, their glowing red eyes scanning the prisoners with amusement. They had done this on many planets before, crushing civilizations and breaking the will of those who opposed them. To them, humanity was no different, just another weak race, easily defeated and now under their control. They had seen no resistance, no hope left in their captives. But they did not understand humans, not truly. and they had no idea that beneath the surface of fear and exhaustion, something dangerous was waiting to be unleashed. Daniel Grayson sat against the rusted wall of the compound, his hands clenched into fists as he watched the Zarinth guards laugh amongst themselves. He had seen them kill without hesitation, executing anyone who was too weak to work or too defiant to obey. He had learned to stay silent, to observe, to wait. He was no longer the man he used to be, a soldier fighting for his country. His country was gone, his people enslaved, and the world he once knew had become a nightmare. But there was still something burning inside him, something that refused to die. He watched the other prisoners, the fear in their eyes, the way they avoided looking at their captors. He could see that they were close to breaking, that the Zarinth had almost succeeded in crushing their spirits. And then, one event changed everything. A young boy, barely 10 years old, struggled to carry a heavy crate of supplies. His small frame trembled under the weight, his knees buckling as he tried to move forward. The Zarinth commander overseeing the labor camp sneered at the sight, his sharp fangs visible as he let out a cruel laugh. Without warning, he stepped forward and struck the child across the face, sending him crashing to the ground. The crate spilled open, scattering the contents across the dirt. The boy whimpered, holding his bruised face, but did not cry. He simply looked up at the towering alien with wide, terrified eyes. The commander's amusement faded, replaced with disgust. He raised his weapon, preparing to strike again, this time with the intent to kill. The other prisoners watched in horror, too afraid to move, too broken to interfere. Daniel felt something snap inside him. He had spent days forcing himself to stay calm, to think rationally, to find the right moment. But this was too much. The Zarinth could take their world, could destroy their cities, could even try to break their spirits, but to strike down a child in cold blood? That was the line, and they had just crossed it. Before he could stop himself, before the logical part of his brain could warn him of the consequences, he was already moving. In an instant, he was on his feet, his body surging with a strength he didn't know he still had. The Zarinth commander barely had time to react before Daniel's fist slammed into his face with all the force of years of bottled-up rage. The sound of bone cracking echoed through the compound as the alien staggered back, shock flashing across his features. No human had dared to fight back like this, not against them. But Daniel wasn't stopping. He grabbed the alien by the throat and drove him into the ground, fists pounding into the creature's armored chest like a hammer against stone. The other Zarinth guards turned, their weapons raised, but Daniel was already moving. He grabbed the fallen commander's blaster and fired without hesitation, the energy bolt tearing through one of the guards before they could react. Chaos erupted in the camp as the prisoners gasped, their eyes widening in disbelief. The Zarinth had underestimated humans. They believed them to be weak, to be afraid. But what they had failed to understand was that humans did not simply surrender. They fought. And when they had nothing left to lose, they became something even the strongest warriors feared. Daniel roared as he charged forward, his body moving with an energy fueled by pure adrenaline. He had no plan, no strategy, just the overwhelming need to destroy every last one of these monsters. He was a soldier again, but this was not a battlefield. This was vengeance. The prisoners, who had spent so long in silence, watching their world fall apart, suddenly felt something stir inside them. The sight of one man fighting back, of one human standing against the impossible, shattered the chains of fear that had held them down. In that moment, they were no longer prisoners. They were survivors. And they would not go quietly. With a collective cry, they surged forward, grabbing whatever weapons they could find, rocks, metal rods, even their own fists. The Zarinth, unprepared for such a response, found themselves overwhelmed as the rebellion spread like wildfire. Daniel fought with the fury of a man who had lost everything, his body moving on instinct, his mind consumed by the single thought of destroying those who had taken his world. He did not feel the pain of his wounds, did not hear the shouts around him. He was lost in the fight, a storm of violence that could not be stopped. By the time the battle ended, the ground was littered with the bodies of fallen Zarinth warriors, their once confident sneers replaced by expressions of shock and fear. The remaining guards, realizing that their control had slipped, retreated into the darkness, their arrogance replaced by something new. As the dust settled, Daniel stood in the center of the carnage, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. He looked around at the faces of the survivors, their eyes no longer filled with hopelessness. For the first time since the invasion, they saw a future one where they did not kneel, where they did not bow. The Zarenth had made a mistake. They had pushed a human too far. And now, they would learn what it meant to face the wrath of a species that refused to be broken. This was just the beginning. The battlefield was a wasteland of fire and death, the sky thick with smoke, the ground littered with bodies both human and alien. The rebellion had begun, and the Zarenth were no longer as confident as they once were. They had thought humanity would fall like every other species before them. They had believed the war was over the moment they landed. But now, as their forces crumbled against an enemy that refused to die, they were beginning to realize their mistake. And at the center of it all stood one man, a warrior unlike anything they had ever faced. Daniel Grayson, once an ordinary soldier, now something else entirely, something the Zarenth had no word for in their language, something that should not have existed. His body was covered in blood, a mixture of human and alien, his uniform torn and scorched from battle. His muscles burned, his wounds screamed for him to stop, but his mind refused to listen. Pain no longer mattered. Fear no longer existed. There was only the fight, the overwhelming need to destroy every last enemy that stood before him. He had seen too much, lost too much, his world taken, his people enslaved, his comrades slaughtered. The Zarenth had pushed humanity beyond its limits, and in doing so, they had awoken something ancient, something primal. A squad of Zarenth warriors, their black armor gleaming under the burning sky, closed in around him, their weapons raised, their red eyes burning with hatred. They were the elite, the finest. Warriors of their empire, trained to crush resistance with ruthless efficiency. Against any other species, they would have been unstoppable. Against Daniel, they were prey. The first alien lunged forward, its plasma blades slicing through the air with deadly precision. But Daniel was faster. He ducked beneath the strike, his body moving with an unnatural speed, and drove his knife deep into the creature's throat. The alien gurgled, clawing at the wound, but Daniel had already moved on. Another enemy raised its blaster, aiming for his head. He grabbed the dead warrior's body, using it as a shield as the energy blast tore through its chest. Before the shooter could react, Daniel was upon him, his fist shattering the alien's skull with a single, brutal strike. The others hesitated, their confidence shaken. They had fought humans before, had slaughtered them by the millions, but this was different. This was not a man, this was a force of nature. Daniel's eyes burned with something they did not understand, something that sent a primal chill down their spines. The humans had a word for it. Rage. The Zarenth had never encountered it before, not like this. It was not the wild, uncontrolled anger of a desperate fighter. It was something deeper, something terrifying. It was the fury of an entire species, channeled into a single warrior who refused to die. The hesitation cost them. Daniel attacked with the fury of a storm, his movements precise, brutal, unstoppable. He tore through them like a beast unleashed, his fists breaking bones, his blade cutting through flesh and armor alike. One by one, the elite warriors of the Zarenth fell before him, their cries of agony drowned out by the chaos of battle. Blood coated his hands, his arms, his face, but he did not stop. He could not stop. This was what he had become, a weapon forged in the fires of war, a berserker fueled by loss and vengeance. The remaining Zarenth turned to flee, their arrogance shattered, their belief in their own superiority crumbling before their eyes. But Daniel did not let them escape. He chased them down like a predator hunting wounded prey, his breath ragged, his vision red. He did not feel the cuts on his skin, the bruises forming beneath his flesh. He only felt the rage, the overwhelming need to finish what had been started. The Zarenth had come to Earth as conquerors. They would leave as corpses. From the shadows, the surviving humans watched in stunned silence. They had fought alongside Daniel, had seen him kill before, but this was something else. They did not know whether to be inspired or afraid. He was one of them, But at the same time, he was something more. A symbol, a legend in the making. The Zarenth had tried to break humanity. Instead, they had created a monster they could not control. As the last alien fell, its body twitching in the dirt, Daniel finally stopped. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, his hands trembling, his body screaming for rest. But his mind was still locked in the battle, still craving more. He had won, but it was not enough. It would never be enough. Not until every last one of them was gone. Not until the war was over. In the distance, the sound of approaching ships echoed through the ruined city, the Zarenth reinforcements arriving. More enemies, more battles to fight. Daniel turned toward the sound, his grip tightening around his blade. His fight was far from over. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a berserker, and the Zarenth had no idea what was coming for them. The sky above Earth was no longer blue. Smoke and fire had consumed it, turning everything into a battlefield of ruin and despair. The once thriving cities now lay in ashes, their streets patrolled by the monstrous Zarenth, towering reptilian warriors who had crushed every resistance with brutal efficiency. Humanity had lost its freedom, its lands, and its hope, or so the invaders believed. But deep beneath the ruins, in the shadows of destruction, something was stirring. A storm that had been building for too long, waiting for the right moment to unleash its fury. The Zarenth had conquered many worlds before, but this time, they had underestimated the enemy. Because humans were not just survivors, they were fighters. And now, the uprising was about to begin. Daniel Grayson knelt in the darkness of a ruined subway station, his hand gripping the cold steel of his rifle. Around him, dozens of others crouched, their faces covered in dirt and scars, their eyes burning with the same fire that refused to be extinguished. These were not trained soldiers, not all of them. Some had once been engineers, teachers, farmers. Ordinary people, forced into war by the cruelty of their invaders. But in war, desperation forged warriors. And now these men and women were ready to strike back. Daniel had seen too much, lost too much. His home was gone, his family likely dead, and the world he once knew was nothing more than a memory. But he refused to die a slave. He refused to let the Zarenth think they had won. The resistance had planned this moment for months. The Zarenth had made the mistake of believing humanity had been completely broken, that those who remained were too afraid to fight. They controlled the skies, the weapons, and the cities, but they did not control the will of the human spirit. Tonight, that spirit would be unleashed like never before. The plan was simple: hit the Zarenth where it hurt, strike them where they thought they were safest. The central control tower in the heart of the ruined city, the command hub, from which the enemy controlled their troops, their weapons, their security systems. If they could take it down, it would shatter the Zarenth's control over the city, giving the remaining human forces a chance to rise. It was dangerous. It was nearly impossible. And it was the only way. Daniel signaled to his team, his heart pounding but his mind steady. They moved like ghosts through the ruins, their footsteps silent, their weapons ready. Above them, the Zarenth patrolled lazily, confident in their victory. That confidence would be their downfall. As the humans reached the edge of the enemy's stronghold, Daniel raised his hand. The signal. In an instant, explosions tore through the night, shaking the ground as fire and smoke erupted from the enemy's supply lines. The Zarenth turned in shock, their shouts filling the air as alarms blared across the city. The distraction had begun. The real battle was about to start. Daniel led the charge, his body moving on instinct, his rifle blazing as he took down the first guard before they could even react. The resistance fighters spread out, striking fast and hard, using the wreckage of the city as cover. The Zarenth, caught off guard, scrambled to respond, their massive bodies struggling to navigate the narrow streets now turned into a war zone. Plasma fire lit up the darkness, the scent of burning metal and flesh filling the air. Humans who had once been nothing more than prisoners now fought like demons, their anger, their pain, their thirst for freedom driving them forward. The command tower loomed ahead, its steel walls guarded by heavily armed Zarenth soldiers. But Daniel did not slow down. He had fought too long, lost too much, to stop now. With a roar, he led the charge, gunfire erupting as they stormed the gates. The enemy fought back fiercely, their weapons cutting down many, but the humans did not stop. They climbed over the wreckage, fought with knives, with fists, with sheer desperation. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but not outmatched. Because the Zarinth fought with strategy, humans fought with their souls. Daniel smashed through the final barrier, his breath ragged, his vision blurred with sweat and blood. He pushed forward, dodging a strike from a Zarinth warrior before driving his knife deep into its throat. The creature collapsed, gurgling in shock, its arrogance shattered. More humans flooded into the tower, their war cries echoing through the halls. In the control room, the Zarinth commanders panicked, their screens flashing warnings as their once perfect rule crumbled around them. They had thought Earth was theirs. But Earth had never belonged to them. And now it was being taken back. With a final push, Daniel reached the main console, his fingers flying over the controls, bypassing security locks, disabling defenses, opening communication lines. A message was sent out across the planet, a call to every remaining human, every hidden fighter, every soul who still had the strength to resist. The uprising has begun. Fight back. Take back what is ours. As the last enemy fell, as the tower's systems collapsed, Daniel looked out over the burning city. The war was far from over. But tonight, humanity had won its first victory, and it would not be the last. The Zarinth Empire had ruled the galaxy for centuries, their armies undefeated, their conquests endless. They had crushed countless civilizations, bending entire worlds to their will, believing themselves invincible. But tonight, as their once mighty fleets burned across the void, as their towering cities crumbled under the weight of rebellion, as their rulers cowered in fear, they finally understood the truth. They were not invincible. They had never been. And it was humanity that had shown them their greatest weakness: pride. Daniel Grayson stood on the edge of a ruined command deck, his battle-worn armor covered in ash and blood, his rifle hanging at his side. Below him, the capital of the Zarinth Empire was in flames, the air filled with the sound of explosions, the screams of a dying regime. What had once been the heart of a brutal, unstoppable empire was now a war zone, its streets overrun with human soldiers and alien rebels who had once been slaves. The resistance had spread like wildfire, igniting rebellion on every world the Zarinth had once ruled with an iron fist. And now, at the center of it all, stood the last stronghold, the Emperor's Palace, a towering fortress of steel and glass that had once symbolized absolute power. Now, it was surrounded, its defenses failing, its leaders desperately trying to escape. The final battle had begun. Daniel moved through the shattered corridors, his team of battle-hardened fighters at his back. They had fought for years to reach this moment, had watched their friends die, had suffered loss beyond measure. But the pain had only made them stronger. The Zarinth had taken everything from them, and now they were taking everything back. As they advanced, enemy forces tried to stop them, the last remnants of an empire that refused to accept its end. But they were weak now, their once feared warriors fighting not with confidence but with desperation. They had never known true war, had never fought an enemy who refused to surrender, who would rather die than bow. And that was why they were losing. A blast door slammed shut ahead, locking them out of the throne room. The Zarinth leadership was inside, their last line of defense holding firm. But they had underestimated humanity for the last time. Daniel planted an explosive charge against the metal, stepping back as the blast tore the massive doors apart. Smoke filled the air, alarms blaring in panic as the humans stormed inside. The Zarinth generals stood in shock, their golden armor gleaming, their weapons trembling in their hands. They had never thought it would come to this. Never imagined that their empire would fall at the hands of the very species they had mocked as weak, as inferior. The Emperor himself, the ruler of 1,000 worlds, sat frozen on his throne, his reptilian eyes wide with disbelief. He had never been on the battlefield, had never seen war with his own eyes, only through reports, through victories won by others. But now, as he faced the man who had brought his empire to its knees, He felt fear for the first time in his long life. Daniel stepped forward, his voice calm, his eyes cold. "You thought we were nothing," he said, his words echoing through the shattered chamber. "You thought we would break, that we would kneel. But you never understood what we are." He raised his weapon, but he did not fire. Instead, he tossed it aside. "You lost this war the moment you thought we would stop fighting." The Emperor let out a guttural snarl, his pride refusing to die even as his empire crumbled around him. With a final, desperate roar, he lunged forward, claws outstretched, fangs bared. But he was too slow. Daniel sidestepped, his fists slamming into the alien's chest with the force of every battle he had fought, every friend he had lost, every nightmare he had endured. The Emperor staggered, gasping for air, his golden armor cracking as he fell to his knees. The mighty ruler of the Zarinth, the one who had enslaved worlds, now knelt before a human. The palace shook as another explosion rocked the city. The resistance had taken control. The war was over. Humanity had won. Daniel turned away, stepping out onto the ruined balcony, looking down at the burning capital. The people were cheering, their chains broken, their voices rising in victory. The Zarinth Empire, once the most feared force in the galaxy, was no more. But Daniel did not celebrate. He had fought too long, seen too much. He knew this was not the end. Freedom had been won, but the scars of war would never fade. Humanity had proven its strength, had shown the galaxy what it was capable of. But at what cost? As the sun rose over the ruined empire, Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, letting the weight of it all sink in. They had won. The war was over. But the future? That was yet to be written.